As SDAs, we all know about the great controversy. We all have this idea in mind that there's this controversy between Christ and Satan going on in the background. At least Satan wants us to think it's just that, a background scenario that's mainly independent from our everyday lives. In light of the great controversy between Christ and Satan, our controversies could be called small controversies in the scheme of things. But as I'm sure we would all admit, we tend to think of our personal controversies as though they're great controversies, and sometimes the great controversy between Christ and Satan becomes pushed out of our thinking as something irrelevant to our everyday choices. But actually, a knowledge of the great controversy brought into our thinking regarding our small controversies can really help. It can impact the choices we make, which will then impact the events of the great controversy itself. Basically, we need to see ourselves as players in the great controversy, and by bringing this fact into the foreground of our thinking, we'll have a real practical advantage when it comes to helping us make our everyday decisions. Bringing the knowledge of the great controversy into our decisions is an instance of having the big picture in mind, versus having just our own small picture in mind. And truly, thinking according to a big picture versus thinking according to a small picture gives us different decision options. So to illustrate the difference between small picture and big picture thinking, say there's a tourist with her family at the Petrified Forest National Park in the state of Arizona in the United States. If they're just thinking about the small picture, they're probably just thinking about themselves and their family and the impact they're having in this one moment. In this small picture, it seems like the decision to take just one piece of petrified wood home would be a great idea for the tourist and his family, as there's so many pieces of it seemingly everywhere. What could it hurt? Taking one piece of petrified wood home for their display shelf seems like a good decision. It isn't going to make a big impact on the forest, and it would be pretty cool to have it in their home, and it sure would make their kids happy because it would be interesting, and they could learn from it. So in the small picture, it seems like that might be a great idea. But what would that look like for them to have the big picture in mind? Well, to have the big picture in mind, they would have to realize that if everyone does this, pretty soon there isn't going to be anything left. When we zoom out to look at the big picture, we see that there are millions of people who visit the Petrified Forest National Park to see these fossils. And if everyone made the decision to take just one piece of wood home with them to put on their display shelf, there would soon be no petrified wood left in the petrified forest. Removing rocks disrupts the delicate balance of the ecosystem and deprives future visitors, including the future of that individual tourist, of the opportunity to experience the park's natural wonders. So we can see that what is done in the small picture affects what the big picture is, and what the big picture is affects what the small picture is too. But it goes without saying that for the individual tourist, the big picture should inform the small picture, or there will be no small picture to experience anymore. So likewise, we should recognize the great controversy between Christ and Satan as the big picture, and the controversies of our personal lives as the small picture. As with the National Forest tourist, it sure is tempting to just not think of things beyond the scope of our personal investments, or our own children, or our own preservation when making decisions about where we want to live, retirement considerations, employment considerations, and the like. Often people are making decisions in relation to more short-term goals that have to do either with themselves or their family. But with the great controversy in mind, we should have something much bigger informing our decisions. We should be asking questions like, wait a second, with this decision that's coming before me right now, since I know there's this great controversy happening, is one option potentially brought about by Satan and what Satan would like me to do? And is another option what God would like me to do? Asking these sorts of questions encourages us to consider things like forwarding the work of the gospel and being on guard against temptations rather than our seeking our own comfort and temporal preservation. Let's highlight the value of this a little more by considering a couple of applications. If we're just thinking about our own life and the life of our family, we might make our decisions based on what's going to be the most financially profitable. But if we have the great controversy in mind, we'll know that the choice which is most financially profitable for us might not be the most financially profitable for Christ's side of the great controversy. In fact, it might even be the very choice Satan would like us to make. So keeping the great controversy in mind can help us to make our decisions based on what would be the most advantageous for the cause of God, rather than for our bank accounts. Likewise, when it comes to raising children, if we're thinking of the small picture, we might make our decisions based on what will bring our kids the most happiness in this life, or even just this afternoon. But as we all know, doing whatever satisfies a child's momentary happiness isn't always what's best for them. If you have the great controversy in mind, you'll be more aware of Satan's devices, and you'll make decisions based on what will bring your children closer to God. As part of this, you'll also see the need to make the decisions that will bring you closest to God so you can have a saving influence on your children. Keeping a knowledge of the great controversy in mind will help you choose what is actually the best for your children, even if this sacrifices short-term happiness. No matter the circumstances, to have the great controversy in mind when making your decisions is to be aware that there are two ways you could go. You could go one way that's really forwarding God's side of the great controversy, or the other way that's forwarding Satan's side of the great controversy. You're cooperating with one side or another. You're choosing one of two ways, really, and Christ talked about these two ways, one leading to life and one leading to death. In Matthew 7, Jesus says, "Enter in by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter in by it. How narrow is the gate, and the way is restricted that leads to life. There are few who find it." And again, that's Matthew 7, 13 through 14. So how can we identify which decisions are working with which side? For any set of options, which would be in harmony with God and which would be following the suggestions of Satan? Thankfully, if we want to know, we aren't left to take a shot in the dark or to go by our feelings. We actually have stuff in Scripture that explains what these two sides of the great controversy are like here in Proverbs 4, which depict these two ways as well. Proverbs 4, 18 through 19 reads, "The path of the righteous is like the dawning light that shines more and more until the perfect day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They don't know what they stumble over." Again, that's Proverbs 4, 18 through 19. So here you have the way that is light and the way that is darkness. One way is the path of a right doer, and is associated with light, which is a symbol of truth. And the other way is the path of wrongdoers, and is associated with darkness, which is a symbol of falsehood. So you can know that if there's any decision that includes any amount of falsehood, it's not the way to go. If it includes lying or anything like that, it's a path brought about by Satan, and taking that path would be working in harmony with Satan. Whereas the path of truth is the path of right doing, and that's the path that promotes Christ's side of the great controversy. Here's another passage that really explains to us more what these two sides are like, what these two options look like for the individual decision maker. It's Galatians 5, and in it, Paul lists the attributes of going with the flesh versus going with the Spirit, obviously going with one of the two contrary ways. Galatians 5, 16 through 26 reads, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you won't fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one another, that you may not do the things that you desire. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the deeds of the flesh are obvious, which are adultery, sexual immorality, uncleanness, lustfulness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, strife, jealousies, outbursts of anger, rivalries, divisions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, even as I also forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit God's kingdom. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faith, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and lusts. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. Let's not become conceited, provoking one another and envying one another." Again, that's Galatians 5, 16 through 26. So if there's some sort of decision you're making, and you're trying to choose between these two paths, if you're being tempted to go along with any of these things of the flesh Paul is mentioning here, you can know that that is the path of falsehood, and that you'd totally be cooperating with Satan if you did those things. And note that Paul even says that the ways or deeds of the flesh are obvious. And it's kind of like, you know you're being tempted in a moment like this. So just take a moment and think about your decision. If you were to act in any of the ways according to the flesh Paul mentions, how does that impact the great controversy? Well, it just actually makes Satan's plans succeed all the more rather than helping Christ's plans succeed. And that's not going to hasten Christ's return. It's going to delay Christ's return. Any of these things Paul mentions on the flesh side of things are things that Scripture is really telling us would be the wrong path to take. It would be siding with Satan's side in the great controversy. Whereas all these other things Paul lists as being the fruit of the Spirit are working with Christ and his angels. So here we see the principles manifested in these two ways of the great controversy between Christ and Satan clearly laid out for us. We need to bring a knowledge of the great controversy into our decision-making and into our awareness of forces at play in producing our options. Are some options from Satan? Are some options from God? If I do this, will I be engaging or operating by principles of love and truth and honesty, goodness and charity? Or is it a decision marked by selfishness and envy? Satan tries to obscure the big picture of the great controversy so we don't see the two decisions for what they really are, one for life and the other for destruction and death. He wants us to think that selfishness is the way to life, the way to joy and peace, and he achieves this deception by getting us to focus on our small picture as though it were the big picture. He doesn't want us to zoom out and get a glimpse of what our selfishness really leads to, our own destruction in addition to the destruction of others. When we view things from the perspective of the big picture, we can see that short-sightedness leads to selfish decisions that lead to death in the end. When we zoom out and take time to evaluate our decisions in light of the two ways, the ways and principles of Christ versus the ways and principles of Satan, we can see that the two ways are really unequal. Only one way can go on forever. The other way ends in death. Therefore, the way of selfishness is unworthy even to be called a way when you really think about it. In the scheme of the big picture of eternity, it's just a dot. Here, but soon to be gone forever. It's barely a way. It's barely a path. Why would we want to take such a short path? If we live with an awareness of the great controversy, if we zoom out and view our reality from this perspective, it helps us see that the two ways are truly dichotomous. The view from the perspective of the great controversy helps pull into our every decision the knowledge of the two ways, and this hopefully will help us make our choices easy ones, because we can see more clearly the end result which our choices lead to. This is hard to accomplish when we are tricked into looking at the small picture, our small controversies, without keeping a knowledge of the great controversy in the forefront of our minds. Thank you for staying with us till the end. We invite you to visit our website, www.bdsda.com, to learn more about who we are, and just as important, who we are not. Please join us each week as we'll continue to offer new and interesting insights for your Sabbath School studies. And if you want to keep up with our new studies as they're published, we recommend subscribing. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on plenty of other podcast apps. Links for subscribing are in the description. From both Ed and me, many blessings.